This is crazy. And we have to be free to discuss these things. This is my biggest concern. So it doesn't affect me anymore. He can keep saying it. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep asking the questions, and it'll keep going on and on and on until they start dealing with the issues in front of them.
We're constantly reminded about parliamentary language and making sure we speak well to each other and we acknowledge people in the right manner. And then the Premier himself comes across and calls Dallas racist. One of the other members the other day called me a transphobe. So this is the kind of stuff that we've unfortunately had to endure, but we're getting thick skin and we're just realizing that you're over the target and you're really accomplishing something in terms of providing information to British Columbians when you're called these names. And that's really unfortunate, but it's the reality.
That's racist. That emotionally charged statement is thrown around so often these days, it's difficult to keep up with what it actually means anymore. Does it mean the expectation that kids should learn math in school, no matter their ethnicity? Because according to Marxist globalists with the Gates Foundation, that's racist. Or that Martin Luther King belief that you shouldn't judge people by the color of their skin. Instead, let's treat everybody the same and based on their merit. That's called colorblindness in Woke 101. And that's racist too. You think all lives matter? Straight to jail. That's racist. And don't even get me started on letting people know the good news, which is that contrary to widespread misinformation to date, not a single body has been discovered in nefarious, unmarked graves full of Indigenous children at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, because that's racist too. Actually, the Kamloops ban says it's white supremacy specifically. So when independent members of BC's legislature, free from party loyalties, double down on stances like the concerns of roughly 30% of British Columbians who are now entertaining the idea of separation shouldn't be ignored, or they raise red flags about Canada's ongoing oppression economy that's fueled by a booming tax-funded reconciliation industry, or they point out the disunity in over 200 First Nations continuing to battle it out for sovereignty over virtually every square inch of BC's land. Well, when those stances get labeled as racist by BC Socialist NDP Premier David Eby and the Penticton Band and Council, is that racism or are they onto something? I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News, and today I bring you an interview with Vancouver Quinchana MLA Dallas Brodie and Kelowna Lake Country Coldstream MLA Tara Armstrong, who are two of three MLAs being called out for such in a letter by the Penticton Band, who is one of hundreds making sovereignty claims. You'll hear the concerns that the BC NDP and that band don't want them raising, and you can let me know in the comments if you think the concerns are valid. What is the reconciliation industry?
Well, the reconciliation industry is the situation that's grown up around the idea of reconciliation. So it's a beautiful idea to reconcile. We all want to reconcile harms and events. You know, they had this in Rwanda and South Africa and so on, and reconciliation is important. But what has happened is that under the envelope of reconciliation, we now have a lot of money being made by people who aren't even Indigenous. They are, let's just start, consultants, law firms, big law firms making big money. We're talking big money. Accountants. So we've got consultants, accountants, lawyers, and then there are counselors and all sorts of different groups of people who are now feeding off of this same bucket of money that was, I think most Canadians believed and intended that this type of money would go to elevate the actual life on the ground of people who are living on reserves, young people who need more hope, and lifting up their life. Because most Canadians, I would think almost all Canadians, want our Native people to have a better life. And unfortunately, what's happened is the money is not getting down to where it's needed. It's sitting at the top and being devoured by these big, and I left out development companies. I'll come back to that. But it's become this circle of money and everybody's in on it now. And it just goes around and around. And if you look at the money being paid, and we've started to dig into this, there are some very large law firms in Canada making a lot of money off of this. And then there are developers who are also cashing in on this. You know, land for free, low interest loans, great profit deals on the outside, on the back end of this. This is not helping the average Native person living in British Columbia.
Well, statistically, in many ways, it seems like that is a correct, at least correlation-wise. We know that our First Nation, our Indigenous people are more likely to be in prison, they're more likely to be homeless, they're more likely to struggle with addiction. So where is that money going? How is it correlating with success? Now, I'm going to go to you, Miss Armstrong. I'm going to read a quote from the statement that you guys have put out from the backlash that you are receiving, including from the Penticton Band. It says, with all due respect to chiefs and councils of these bands, British Columbia simply cannot accommodate more than 200 sovereignties within its borders. Why is that so?
Well, when you think about it, Drea, you know, would you want to be on an airplane with pilots, 200 of them, over 200 of them that all have controls to the airplane? You know, we have to find a way to come together and work together and really move in the same direction for the province to actually succeed and tap into our resources and all the things that we know we need to be doing. And it makes it very, very challenging when you have that many people claiming sovereignty over parts of the province.
Well, we're seeing a little taste of that now. I think the public is really paying attention to what's happening in some of the public areas. For the last couple of years, Joffrey Lakes, for example, has been shut down from, I think it's 2 different First Nations who are claiming assertion. It hasn't even been settled whether or not it is their territory. And now we see a whale's carcass has, come up on the beach. Certainly not an issue that is only concerning to Canadians who are Indigenous. But yet non-Indigenous people are not welcome on that beach right now. What's your comment? Says there is some talk about that right now. What do you make of that situation in these public spaces where First Nations are saying, hey, no, this is our territory, get out of here. We have some special ceremony we want to do. And the ministry in saying you guys could be fined if you're not Indigenous and you show up.
I mean, I don't know how that's serving the interests of all British Columbians. And I think that's what we have to start thinking about and start realizing that we have to all work together again. We have to have these spaces that we all contribute to and we all fund for the benefit of all British Columbians. And I think that's what we have to recognize when these issues start to surface. So, I really just feel as though right now this is not benefiting all British Columbians.
I may be old-fashioned, but when you exclude people based on their race, that used to be what racism is. But right. Instead of that being called racist, you guys are being called racist. Let's just show a little bit of what's been going down in the House.
British Columbians are losing hope, Mr. Speaker, and so I ask again, will the Premier engage in meaningful consultation with this critical group of people in British Columbia?
Premier. Speaker, this member's incoherent and consistently racist posturing in this House against Indigenous and First Nations that do in fact have rights and sovereignty in this province.
Now, before I get into those allegations as well as the Penticton Band a little bit further, what does that feel like? What does that feel like to be an elected MLA? You guys had your previous careers as well. You're both moms. And to be accused by the Premier of being a racist?
Well, it's not surprising from Premier Eby, frankly. I've gotten used to his hyperbole, and I've also, very much realized now, and I think I knew this before any of this even happened, as soon as they start calling you names, they are avoiding discussing the issue that's in front of them. Let's get the name calling out of the way. Stop just trying to stop the discussion by calling names and start dealing with the very questions that people are asking. I'm asking them. MLA Armstrong is asking them. People have questions, and whenever they don't like the questions, they just call you down, call you a racist, call you a bigot, call you some kind of phobe. And these things are actually very destructive to our political discourse in BC and in Canada. And it's a very convenient way to shut down conversations you don't want to have. And it doesn't affect me anymore. They've called me every name now, and I've moved through it, and I just expect this now. And it just seems to be politics is a dirty game, and these are the games that are played. And the key is to not let these hideous names that people call you scare you off the topic. These things have to be discussed. We're talking massive dollar numbers here. We are talking about, we're doing work to figure out exactly how much money is going into this one issue through every ministry. And let's say it turns out to be the 4th or 5th largest line item in the provincial budget. Are you saying that we're not allowed to ask any questions about something that is taking up this much of the public money, taxpayers' money, because to bring it up, even to ask questions about it, is racist? This is crazy, and we have to be free to discuss these things. This is my biggest concern. So it doesn't affect me anymore. He can keep saying it. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep asking the questions, and it'll keep going on and on and on until they start dealing with the issues in front of them.
We're constantly reminded about parliamentary language and making sure we speak well to each other and we acknowledge people in the right manner. And then the Premier himself comes across and calls Dallas racist. One of the other members the other day called me a transphobe. So this is the kind of stuff that we've unfortunately had to endure, but we're getting thick skin and we're just realizing that you're over the target and you're really accomplishing something in terms of providing information to British Columbians when you're called these names. And that's really unfortunate, but it's the reality.
Now, speaking about bringing information to the public, obviously this is a BC issue. I think that's, no one can argue 200 different First Nations wanting sovereignty in British Columbia and the discussion about that. No one can say that is not a BC issue. However, you guys are also elected to represent the constituents in your riding. How specifically are you doing so? Can you give some examples of why this should matter to them?
Well, this matter has come up in the context, in my riding in particular. Well, it's adjacent to my riding, but I'm the only Conservative MLA in all of the Lower Mainland of Vancouver.
Right.
Every other riding is held by the NDP. So I'm getting people writing to me and asking me about what we can do to push back against these. There are some massive real estate developments going on right in the heart of Vancouver, which have people in high alarm level that they didn't know, I think, what reconciliation meant, and these lands that were given and transferred. So it's on people's minds. At the south end of the Burrard Street Bridge, every day people are driving by, and the amount of development that's going in by the MST Corporation, which is the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, have formed a corporation that is headed up by a former Aquilini Developments fellow named David Negrin. He's the president. They are putting in 7,000 units in an area that barely has that many people living in it. So we're basically talking about the installation of a brand new city. Young Native people who need hope and opportunity, whose lifespans have been shortened. The drug problems is horrible on reserve. These stats are, you can look up the stats yourself. I mean, the stats on this. And I think that this is part of the problem and why people are writing to me. And I'm getting a lot of feedback, people saying, thank you for talking about this. It's uncomfortable, but it has to be discussed. That's what's happening in my riding.
Yeah, and Dallas covered that well. I mean, for me in my riding, I get a lot of inquiries just about the whole situation in Haida Gwaii and how that happened. They're worried about property rights and how it could possibly affect them with the DRPA legislation. So there's lots of those types of issues that come up and get discussed in and around my constituency.
Well, I think the freedom that you have as independents and, of course, your boldness and braveness in general has given a lot of British Columbians more representation than they've ever seen when it comes to these issues. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we end this interview?
You know, Drea, I'm sorry, Dallas, I don't mean
No,
to.
go ahead, Tara.
What I want to say is that I just really want to see everybody in this province have the opportunity to prosper. And that includes, obviously, all the wonderful people that live in these Indigenous communities.
I've actually received letters of thanks from a few people on the Musqueam Reserve. They're afraid to give their names, but they've actually reached out and said they'd like to meet with me, and they thank me. And I've gotten letters from Indigenous people around the province as well who have said, thank you, Mrs. Brodie. And I really, like, I have we all want better for these people, but we are not seeing it happen. And I think taxpayers don't mind doing their share and helping these groups, but they want to see results. And so I really want to say that, you know, the Musqueam people are in my riding, and I want better for everybody on that reserve.
At Rebel News, we don't back down from bringing you the other side of the story, even if it's uncomfortable to do so. But we can't do any of that without you. If you appreciate my reports on this topic, please support them. Help make them possible. You can do so by going to kamloopsdocumentary.com and donating what you can there, because that goes towards all the time and efforts to dig in to get the truth.